I'm going to help you choose the best build to use with your one-handed spear in Albion Online. This whole channel actually started from a guide for the one-handed spear, but that was last year. Most parts of the guide are still very relevant, but I want to update and go over one specific part: the build, the items, what items to choose and what to buy if you want to have a good time in solo PvP with the spear. There are two things to understand before we go over every single item slot in detail. Number one, the spear is a very flexible weapon, and this is also reflected in what types of items you can choose for your build. There is a lot of room for you to pretty much choose what you like and adapt to the current meta or the situations you are in. If there are strong flavor of the month type items that are used a lot in solo PvP right now, chances are that one-handed spear can also use most of them. And when those items change, you can also change some of your items to the new meta. At the end of the day, it is more important to play according to the items you selected than it is to figure out the theoretically best items. And point number two, before we go into details of all the item choices, the spear is very well equipped to do both kiting and brawling, based on what the situation requires. Kiting means using space and mobility to gain a bit of an advantage, and brawling means pretty much standing next to your enemy and hitting each other with everything you have. And a typically successful spear build and spear game plan includes both of those two things. For example, maybe you kite a little bit to gain an advantage over your melee enemy, and then you commit for a brawl to realize that advantage and finish them off and kill them. I suggest that you balance when you choose your build between being strong at both of those two things, and that you don't go too far in one direction. You don't become a mindless brawler without any chance to kite, and also you don't become kind of a Frost cosplayer who just kites and cannot ever take a brawl. Okay, I suggest that you seek balance. With that in mind, let's go. For your main hand, the spear. For your offhand, there is currently one good choice, and that is the torch. Cooldown reduction is great, and so is the bonus attack speed. With torch, you can fall into a very comfortable rhythm of using your auto attacks and some Qs in between. It's also very, very cheap. It provides value in every single fight and situation, and in fact, you should just go with torch. But there are still two items before we move on that are worth mentioning. Mistcaller used to be a stronger option for spear than it is right now, but it's still not bad. However, it's only really good when the rest of your build strongly supports a kiting playstyle. It gives you good cooldown reduction, obviously, but it limits your strength as a brawler too much, in my opinion, compared to the torch. And final, not terrible option remains the face breaker. This item is kind of the opposite of the Mistcaller. It will really do nothing to help you kite, but it does provide decent value for brawling. Overall, it is currently just objectively weaker than Torch, but if your role-playing needs require a shield, choose this one. Let's talk about capes. For a cape, there are three very good options in my opinion, and then a couple more decent after that. So the three very strong ones are Avalonian Cape, Martlock Cape, and Undead Cape. Remember the point I just made at the beginning? Playing according to your build is usually more important than choosing the theoretically correct build. Well, this is very well illustrated by your choice of cape. So if you go with Avalonian Cape, which gives you damage and more power in brawls as it also reduces your opponent's damage, then you need to expect to have, and you kind of need to have a bigger advantage in order to go in for that final fight to try to kill your enemy. If you go for Martlock Cape, it is by no means weaker, but your game plan should change a little bit, meaning that if you're both 50% HP and you have Avalonian, you might have already messed up a little bit, but if you're both 50% HP and you still have Martlock Cape, you should be much braver at taking the final fight. It functions a bit as that bait that your enemy might forget about. Now, the Undead Cape is usually valuable for any build which I would say goes from tier 8 higher. So it really depends on your playstyle and on your specific strategy. For lower IP builds, obviously this is way too expensive and unnecessary, but for higher IP builds, It's pretty good, especially if you learn to use your undead cape not just to get away, but to also win some fights. On the spear, when you're invisible in undead cape, you can still stack Qs, and then as soon as your damage debuff from the undead cape ends, you try to execute your opponent. And this is a pretty good strategy also to use on the Martlock cape, which obviously is a bit different, but can often get your fight to the same position where you just have that last couple of seconds of your Martlock cape, you either execute your enemy or you are dead. A big benefit of the Avalonian cape is the psychological advantage you get from getting that early HP advantage if you do proc your cape successfully at the beginning, especially against brawling heavy fights or brawling heavy opponents. Now the two good options, which are not maybe as good but are still very much viable, are Thetford cape and the new Smuggler's cape. The Thetford cape functions similar to Avalonian cape, meaning it just gives you extra damage. The reason I prefer Avalonian cape is the damage debuff it puts on your enemy, and the fact that with Thetford cape it's just too many times that I've accidentally aggroed mobs around, and if you're fighting one-on-one or even one-on-whatever in the mists, it just can be really annoying, especially if you're in the Heretics mist, you know, you're taking a good fight and suddenly you aggro a bunch of mobs who start rooting you or force you to create space and all those things. So that's why I knock it down one tier. And the Smuggler's cape is really good. The new cape which just came out with last update, it's really good for 1v1s, and the spear can obviously also use it. Any weapon can. Double healing potion is great, but the fact that it has such a long cooldown means that for anything other than going for a 1v1 fight, it's going to be really annoying, and it also becomes pretty abusable now that people understand how it works. So they see that you used your first potion and they just disengage, reset, and now you either wait 4 minutes or you're gonna fight without your cape entirely, or if you just finish the fight and someone else roll up, once again, are you gonna wait or are you going to just not have a cape at all? So let's move on to your boots. Now for boots, the kind of staple suggestion and still extremely strong for the spear is rejuvenating sprint. So any plate boots on rejuvenating sprint are just basic good mobility and gives you a bit of extra tankiness with a tiny bit of heal. Now the current flavor of the month boots, which actually it's more like flavor of 3 months, and looking at the next patch it seems like the developer is not yet addressing this. The currently wildly popular demon boots are also something that the spear can use. Well, pretty much every build that does not struggle with energy right now is using demon boots in solo PvP, and so probably you should do that on the spear as well. I have a separate video specifically about demon boots which you can check out if you haven't, but for now I have to suggest it as just being the unbalanced strongest option for solo PvP, allowing you to catch up, allowing you to run away from bad situations and have a lot of extra mobility without significant drawbacks. But it also allows you to then switch to rejuvenating sprint if you feel like that's what you need. So it's a great choice right now. If you don't want to choose any of the plate boots or go with demon boots, then the only other choice that is really reasonable in my opinion is going with any of the leather shoes and having them with on refreshing sprint. Now, you, as we talked about earlier, you're kind of balancing between kiting and brawling. If you go for refreshing sprint, you're nudging a little bit towards kiting because you're reducing your cooldowns, so you have a bit more options in the fight with your spells. A little bit, it's not big, but at the same time you're losing the little bit of extra HP. So a bit more for kiting, a bit less for brawling. And finally, for boots that you should not use, energetic sprint is really not necessary on the spear. It's not worth losing the benefits of any other boots you would choose. If you are constantly running into energy issues, solve them a different way. The best way is to upgrade your helmet so that you have a little bit larger energy pool and energy regeneration. But honestly, unless it is a very long fight and you are specifically using Impaler, or perhaps Harpoon can also have some energy issues, well, unless it's a very long fight, you shouldn't really be running into any energy problems on the spear. Another extra point, which I also made in the original guide and still remains very true, is to not use Wanderlust on spear if your focus is PvP. If you just want some boots to help you get away and you just want to, farm mobs or do PvE or gathering, sure, Wanderlust is not terrible, it can help you. But if your focus is PvP, then I suggest not to use Wanderlust, because spear for its maximum effectiveness relies on being able to control the spacing of the fight, and to make that decision many times in a fight. Sometimes you need to space away, sometimes you want to close the gap, and you want to be able to do this more than just using your boots once for 60 seconds, and then if you mess it up, that's it. And plus, what if you need to catch your enemy with just a couple steps? So Wanderlust takes a lot of those things or those tools away from you, so they're not really good for the spear. Next, let's talk about choosing your chest armor. Your chest armor has a very big impact on how strong you are and what kind of build you are essentially running. My suggestion for you on the spear is to go with leather armor. First of all, any of the leather armors will work fine. Keeping it on Inferno Shield is a very good basic option which is strong for almost all typical fight situations. However, there are a couple which stand out. Now, in the original video, I mentioned Assassin Jacket and Stalker Jacket. It's time to change this. Assassin Jacket remains probably your best option for the spear, especially if you're going with low tier or mid tier. So that is still a great choice, which offers you Inferno for more brawl heavy situations and the ambush invisibility for, first of all, to be safer in the mists or open world in general, so that you can kite or disengage when you need, and secondly, in certain specific matchups, once again, to kite away or to dodge some things like the mercenary jackets that your enemy might have or something else. So Assassin Jacket, very good. However, the Stalker Jacket, after its big nerf, is pretty weak. It's even not very popular for mobility, hyper mobility builds anymore, but on spear it's definitely not something you should be using anymore for PvP purposes. Instead, there is a different jacket which moves up from all the leather jackets into the S tier together with Assassin Jacket, and this new choice is the Mistwalker Jacket. Now, Mistwalker Jacket currently is incredibly expensive compared to most leather jackets, so this is not very good for low IP or low budget strategies. But once you reach, I would say tier 7 at least, maybe tier 8, or if you're just willing to spend more money, if you're less about making silver and you're more about, having fun or giving yourself best chances to win different fights, then Mistwalker Jacket is the best choice. It still offers you that basic Inferno Shield, which is a very strong very strong spell to have. It gives you that leather armor damage boost, which is in this case 30%, very good, something you absolutely like on the spear. But it also gives you an amazing option in the Mistwalker Jacket special ability, which is probably one of the best defensives in all of Albion, or at least for solo PvP. This means that you can now fight Fists of Avalon because you can dodge their E completely. You can now fight or get away from Curse Staffs after another fight, for example. This gives you a lot of different choices and on things that you can do and matchups and situations you can solve. Also, this, by the way, works against Mercenary Jackets the same way that Assassin Jacket would, but even better. It's also something you can use to just dodge specific things. If you're running away and there's a dagger chasing you, you can dodge their Shadow Edge and you're free to go. So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways you will use this. If you're looking for the best of the best, I suggest Mistwalker Jacket. If you're looking for the best of the best, but you're on a budget or just going lower tier, I suggest Assassin Jacket. If you just want a basic choice, go with any leather jacket and go with Inferno Shield. Let's have a quick chat about using cloth armor or plate armor on the spear. I have tried both and actually really enjoyed all these different choices. Do I suggest them for you? However, if you're going out on the spear, it's a bit tricky. First of all, with the light armor, this is it's a way to make your fights shorter, but it also means that you're going to be less likely to take brawls. So you're taking one step towards more kiting, but then still doing that spear thing of going in for the final brawl with your extra big damage. So it's not bad, it is definitely viable, and if you want a bit of an extra challenge, I suggest trying one. Especially good for this will be Cleric Robe, Mage Robe, or Phase Scale Robe. So it's something that it's a bit difficult to explain in the sense that you need to experience. It's a bit of a different approach to PvP than your leather armor spear build. It can work, but it's definitely overall, if your goal is just to maximize how strong you are across as many different PvP situations as you can, then just stick to leather armor and don't go for cloth. On the other side, plate armor is once again taking you away from that optimal place where spear has all the tools Plate armor will mean that your fight will be a bit longer. You will be weaker essentially when you're kiting, and you will be better equipped to brawl. So once again, I don't suggest it, especially if you don't consider yourself, advanced user who just wants a new challenge, but rather you're still trying to learn or still just trying to make maximum silver. I don't suggest going for plate armor. However, currently there is one plate armor which is so strong in solo PvP meta, and that is Armor of Valor, that even going for plate and losing some of the flexibility on the spear, to me seems like it can be quite worth it. So if you want a new challenge and something new to try with the spear, then from cloth armor, choose one of these three I mentioned. From plate armor, go with Armor of Valor, try it out, but be ready that you are not going to be as strong, but you'll have some new and more interesting or different tools to handle situations. Let's move on to the most varied category, where you have the biggest choice of items, and that is your helmet. In my opinion, when choosing your helmet, you should think even more than when choosing the rest of your build. You should think about what kind of situations you are going to be in, and essentially who or what are you going to fight against or have to deal with. And what this really means is that as meta changes, as different other builds become popular, different other items, then your helmet choice and which one is the best and which one is weaker also starts changing. Currently, I see quite clearly that there are three helmets which are very strong for the spear in the current solo PvP climate. Number one, the Stalker Hood. This has been the case for a long time, and it remains an exceptional choice. It is not only very cheap and kind of simple to use, but it also gives you a very nice counter to a lot of what is happening, which is assassin jackets and undead capes. So you can deal with quite a bit of kiting, but also this gives you the kind of damage boost that the spear otherwise kind of lacks in order to finish off opponents. So you kite them, you get a bit of an advantage, and then you go in for the final brawl, and thanks to Stalker Hood, you can actually capitalize on that advantage, because once they get low HP, 3-stack E will finish a lot of your targets. So Stalker Hood, very good choice, simple and cheap. Next, S tier helmet currently for the spear is the Helmet of Valor. Helmet of Valor is overall one of the best helmets and headpieces, and has been for a while, for all weapons, because it offers a purge which is incredibly versatile. Now it is a bit trickier to use, meaning that it has longer cooldown, you can mess it up, you can even completely miss your Helmet of Valor, or you can purge the wrong thing. So it requires more game experience to take advantage of this, but once you do have experience, this gives you tools to fight almost anyone, at least to use your helmet and be useful against almost anyone in almost any situation. You can purge boots to catch or run away, you can purge defensives to win brawl, you can even remove Cultist Cowl from yourself, and if you are very good at timing things, you can even use this to fight Prowlings, which is currently the most popular weapon in the Mists, so you can use Helmet of Valor at the right time to remove the Polymorph. Next up, so go for Helmet of Valor if you want to have more budget and you want to be prepared for more different things. Next up is the Cultist Cowl. Now Cultist Cowl is a bit more niche in some ways, meaning that you are not always going to get value out of it. Specifically, if your enemy is a kiter, so if you're fighting frosts or bows, then it can be a little bit difficult to really use your helmet well. However, in the current relatively brawl-heavy meta, which it has been already for a couple months, where hypermobility was nerfed last year, demon boots were buffed, there's also other things, royal boots, so there's more brawlers that you're gonna find, and Cultist Cowl destroys a lot of those brawlers very well, and it's something that the spear can use pretty well. So once you do go in for the brawl, or if they come to you and they force you into a brawl, you can use it as a good defensive. You will destroy a lot of shields, I mean, you will destroy a lot of swords, you will do very well against Death Givers, it's very nice against Panthers if you use it after they polymorph you to deny them a good transformation. So Cultist Cowl gets a lot of value in most matchups and is my number 3 pick for when you're choosing your helmet. Now if you want to go one step down, and believe me, any of these helmets can work very well. If you particularly like anything on the list here, for any reason, just go with what you like and check it out and see. Maybe you will find out why it's not as strong, or maybe you will make it work very well because of your personal playstyle. So the second tier of helmets to choose from are Guardian Helmet, very strong item, just a good basic defensive that is, I wouldn't say simple to use, but it's simple to get value out of, especially if you use it at least once at the end of the fight. It's a great way to bait enemies. Next, and also it's very good because of the big resurgence of curse staffs in solo PvP after the demon boots buff. Next up, the Mercenary Hood. Mercenary Hood remains an amazing and simple choice. It's a cheap item that will be valuable in every single fight, but does not feel that as impactful, and it's a bit easier to miss. You know, it's not just something you click randomly. You kind of need to understand a bit better of the matchup and how to use it. Are you going to use it to catch up to your opponent, to get away, to space away, or is there something specific you need to get the damage debuff on your enemy for? So Mercenary Hood, good choice, absolutely simple, but a little bit tricky that you can sometimes miss. Definitely trickier than Stalker Hood, for example. Next up, the Fiend Cowl is a very strong purge, but it's more limited than Helmet of Valor, since you cannot purge yourself with it, and absolutely something that if you want to purge, but Helmet of Valor is either too expensive or too difficult for you, then absolutely go with Fiend Cowl, and you'll almost have the same thing that if you use at the right time, you will be golden. And finally, helmets that are pretty good and viable, but maybe not as universally strong as the ones we've talked about, are Cowl of Purity. If you're going for a more kite playstyle, then it's very useful to have some damage from far to avoid mounting up, to keep your enemy in combat, and to just generally up your damage that you can do while you're kiting. You can go with Duskweaver Helmet. This is exceptionally good when paired with Cripple. In other situations, it can be a bit tricky. It's not going to be as universally useful as some of the other options we talked about, but still overall generally good, except for very brawl-heavy matchups, unfortunately. And then finally, the Hunter Hood. It's a helmet that, if you've seen my videos, you probably know I don't really like. After all the nerfs through the years, it's become a very weak option. I don't think you should choose it, but if you're still learning PvP and you've chosen to do it with the one-handed spear, then choose the Hunter Hood, and it will help you with having a good, simple defensive button that you can do quite a lot of damage with if you click it at the right moment as you're learning other things, and then I suggest you move on to other helmet options as you get better at PvP. And this brings us to the final point of putting together your spear build, and that is your consumables. For consumables, so first of all, for potions, after the potion cooldown, which was implemented last year, so there's a 10-second cooldown whenever you change a potion or equip one in an empty slot. This means that potion game has become a lot simpler, meaning that you can get away by pretty much just breeding healing potions. If you're not using the Mistwalker Jacker, I would suggest bringing a Gigpot, which will open some new fights for you that otherwise are very difficult. Those same Curse Staffs, Fists of Avalon for example, even Fire Staffs, because you can get over firewalls. Those, if you want to fight some of those, having a Gigpot that you can swap to before the fight starts will be very useful. So healing potion as your default. Please don't use Gigpots against swords or other spears or stuff like that. Use healing as default, but do keep a Gigpot ready. Invispot is probably good to have, but this is not so much for PvP, but more to get away, or if you are interested in potentially ganking someone based on sound. In Abbeys, for example, this can be pretty useful. And poisons are still decent when you're going higher IP, although now that they no longer really give you much damage against mounted enemies, which was the main usage for a spear to use the poison potion to help dismount. Now I would say you don't really need to use poison potions at all. So take healing potions with you, and then a couple Gigpots and a couple Invispots just to be ready for certain situations, and you'll be absolutely fine. For food, you have two good options. First of all, the Eel Stew. Eel Stew gives you damage and cooldown reduction, and hence plays more into a bit of a kitier playstyle. It is also exceptionally useful to have, and I suggest that when you go into mists or open world, that you actually eat your Eel Stew already beforehand. It is very useful in all kinds of weird PvP situations where it's not really a clear 1v1 fight, but rather you are ganking somebody with lower IP, or you are being ganked and have to try to get away from something or someone you don't want to fight. So it's all those multi-way situations where you're not fighting one specific person, for those Eilstew is going to give you pretty much exactly what you need. However, if you get into a clear 1v1 fight, so you set up against an opponent who is roughly equal tier to you or roughly similar, and you expect it to be a fight which does include some brawling, then I very strongly suggest that you use a Roasted Snapper. And in general, I feel that Roasted Snapper in almost all 1v1 matchups is going to be stronger. Even though as a spear you do both kiting and brawling, the kind of boost that you get to the brawling part from Roasted Snapper is very, very noticeable. The only 1v1 matchups where you would still like to be on Eilstew and not change your food is going to be against very clear kite only builds. So most likely when you're fighting against Frost Staffs, against bows, and against most hammers. Depends on the hammer build. And just to clarify, since I got some of these questions last time I made a similar guide, the fact that there is tier 8 Eilstew or tier 7 Roast Snapper on screen doesn't mean you need to go that high tier, okay? There's all of these foods exist in all kinds of different tiers. I know that almost everyone listening to this knows, but in case you're one of the players who is new to Albion, pick the tier that is suitable for your budget and the build that you're going for, okay? Don't just don't replace Eilstew with a cheap omelette or something. Just buy lower tier Eilstew instead. And speaking of omelette, I suggest that you avoid. Don't use omelette for spear. Eilstew is pretty much just strictly better. Don't use beef stew for spear. Roast Snapper or Eilstew, depending on situation, are going to give you more value. And just like any other build or weapon for solo PvP, bringing cabbage soup of course is a very good idea to be able to quickly heal up when for some reason you are out of combat and you need it. At the end of the day, with this build guide and with any kind of builds you see or play, remember first of all that understanding why you chose something or why something is good or not is gonna be more valuable than actually having that thing. Because if you understand the reasons, you can apply the basics of PvP to whatever the situation is in front of you. And secondly, what I mentioned at the start of this video, playing according to the items and the build that you have selected for yourself and according to the consumables that you have on you right now is going to be more valuable and more important than choosing the theoretically most correct items in the first place. But knowing yourself and your build is only half of the information that you need to be successful in PvP. If you're wondering that maybe you might be inspecting your opponents wrong, then it's gonna be very useful for you to check out this video next.